A woman who hadn't slept under a real roof in 3 years crawled into a cave in the Berkshire Mountains, expecting nothing but shelter from an October storm. What she found instead was a young girl bound to an iron stake, duct tape sealing her mouth shut, and less than 3 steps away, a nest of timber rattlesnakes already agitated by the scent of fresh blood. Lennox Avery was 27, a former trauma nurse who'd lost everything: her license, her home, her name after her corrupt cop husband, Bradley, dragged her into a federal case she hadn't had anything to do with. She'd been living out of a broken-down Toyota Corolla with nothing but a worn-out first-aid backpack she couldn't bring herself to throw away, because even after the world had erased her, she still couldn't walk past someone in pain without stopping. She didn't know that the girl in that cave was the younger sister of the most dangerous man on the East Coast, a man who ran a billion-dollar empire by day and the most powerful crime family by night, a man so feared that people in his own organization hadn't heard him raise his voice in 5 years because he'd never needed to. She didn't know about the kidnapping, the ransom he'd refused, or the traitor who'd been sitting at his right hand for 18 years, the same man who'd made sure the truth wouldn't reach him in time. All Lennox knew was that a girl was going to die if she didn't move right now. So she moved. What happened next would send 5 black armored SUVs to her doorstep by morning and put her face to face with a man who hadn't let anyone see him vulnerable in 18 years, until a homeless woman with steady hands walked out of the darkness carrying his sister in her arms. If that opening gave you chills, smash that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a story like this. Now let's go back to that October night in the Berkshires and walk through every second of what happened next. Lennox lay flat on her stomach on the wet stone floor, half her body still outside the mouth of the cave. Rain lashed her back like a whip, but she couldn't feel anything except the dry, brittle, rattling sound echoing from inside, the sound that anyone who grew up in New England had been taught to run from the moment they heard it. She didn't run. She crawled in. Her knees slipped over the damp, moss-covered stone, both hands gripping the ground that felt as cold as steel. The darkness inside the cave was so thick that she had to wait for the next flash of lightning to flare through the entrance before she could see clearly what was in front of her. When that burst of light came, she saw everything at once. The girl was tied up, sitting with her back against an iron post, her head slumped to one side, dark brown hair stuck to the dried blood on her forehead. Her hands were cinched behind her back with plastic zip ties, her wrists swollen purple-black from the loss of circulation. Silver tape was wrapped twice around her mouth, and less than 3 steps from the girl's feet, a mass of snake bodies lay coiled together on the stone floor. At least 15 of them, maybe 20, their tails vibrating in waves and forming a constant warning chorus. Lennox stopped breathing. She knew the species, timber rattlesnake. Late October in the Berkshires, they searched for rocky dens to survive the winter, curling together in large clusters. Normally, they didn't strike unless provoked, but in a space this tight, with the smell of fresh blood, with a human being struggling right beside them, every normal rule meant nothing. The girl saw Lennox. Her eyes flew wide open, showing white, filled with absolute panic. She began to thrash, trying to scream through the tape, her heels kicking against the stone floor. The 2 nearest snakes immediately lifted their heads, their bodies curving into an S shape, ready to strike. Lennox raised one hand, palm facing the girl, and whispered in the steadiest voice she could hold. "Don't move. I'm a nurse. Look into my eyes. Just look into my eyes." The girl stopped struggling. Her whole body trembled violently, but her eyes locked onto Lennox's, as if that gaze were the only thing keeping her from falling off the edge of a cliff. Lennox began moving deeper inside, inch by inch. She kept her body as close to the ground as possible, lowering her center of gravity, lowering the heat her body gave off, because she knew snakes sensed warmth through their facial pits. Every step she placed was calculated, her weight spread evenly so she wouldn't send vibrations through the stone floor. 3 minutes to move 2 meters. When she was close enough, she pulled the utility knife from the side pocket of her backpack and opened the blade so slowly it didn't make a click. She slid the blade under the first zip tie around the right wrist, turned it gently, and cut. The snap of breaking plastic rang through the cave like a miniature gunshot. A snake less than 1 meter away lifted its head, its tail rattling wildly. Lennox froze. The girl froze. Both of them watched the snake until it lowered its head and slowly curled back into the cluster. Lennox waited another 30 seconds, then cut the second tie. Another snap. Another snake head rising. Another frozen stillness. Another wait. The third tie was on the left wrist. Blood rushed back into the girl's hands as circulation returned, and she almost let out a moan of pain. Lennox placed her hand over the girl's mouth, right on top of the tape, pressed lightly, and shook her head. The girl clenched her teeth, tears streaming down onto the back of Lennox's hand. 2 zip ties around the ankles. Cut. Wait. Cut. Wait. Every time the plastic snapped, Lennox thought this would be the last second she remained alive. When the final tie dropped, Lennox slowly took the girl's arm and pulled her to her feet. The girl staggered, her legs numb after being bound for so many hours. Lennox supported her, one arm wrapped around her waist, and began guiding her toward the cave mouth. Then she looked down. The lead snake, nearly 5 feet long, its body as thick as a grown person's wrist, was sliding straight toward the girl's foot. Lennox covered the girl's mouth with her whole hand, pulled her close against her own body, and stood still, completely still. She could feel the girl's heart hammering as if it wanted to burst through her chest, pressed against Lennox's ribs. She could feel cold sweat running down her own spine. The snake glided across the toe of the girl's shoe, its body heavy and slow, its tongue flicking out and drawing back in with steady rhythm. 1 minute, a minute and a half, almost 2 minutes. The snake passed by and rejoined the cluster. Lennox didn't remember when she started breathing again. She only knew that her legs had begun to move, pulling the girl with her, heading toward the cave entrance where the rain was pouring down like a wall of water. When her foot touched the mud outside, when the cold rain cut into the skin of her face, when the girl in her arms folded forward and began dry heaving, Lennox finally realized her knees were shaking so badly she could barely stand. But she still stood. She still held the girl, and she didn't let go. Lennox dragged the girl about 10 steps away from the cave entrance before the girl collapsed. Both knees struck the mud. Her body folded forward, and she began dry heaving violently, her whole body convulsing in waves. Lennox knelt beside her, one hand holding the girl's forehead, the other supporting her chest so the broken ribs wouldn't take any more pressure. When the retching passed, the girl sagged sideways into Lennox's shoulder, gasping for breath. And Lennox began doing what her body had been trained to do through thousands of shifts before. She assessed the injuries. 2 fingers pressed gently along the right rib cage, and the girl hissed, her body jerking hard. Broken, at least 1 rib, maybe 2. Low placement, not touching the lung because there was no wheezing in her breathing. Bruising spread from her left cheekbone all the way down to her jawline, her left eye swollen shut, the orbital bone not broken, but the hematoma was severe. The cut on her forehead was about 4 centimeters long, deep to the fascia, blood still seeping slowly as rainwater ran down her chin. Her lips were cracked and dry white. Her skin had lost elasticity when Lennox lightly pinched the back of her hand. Severe dehydration, probably nothing to drink since she had been taken. Lennox pulled the backpack down from her shoulder, unzipped it, and spread the supplies out on a flat rock beside the oak tree root so the rain wouldn't wash them away. This backpack had once sat inside a locker in the emergency department at Boston Medical Center, with her name on it, packed with supplies that met hospital standards. Now it was frayed at both corners, the zipper jammed on one side, but inside, it still held the things she needed. Kelly hemostats, betadine, sterile gauze, expired 7 months ago, but still sealed in its packaging. A temporary aluminum splint that could be bent to follow the shape of the ribs, medical tape, and a bottle of rainwater that she always filled every morning from the bucket she kept on the roof of the Toyota. Lennox rinsed the cut on the girl's forehead with rainwater, used gauze soaked with betadine to clean away the mud and clotted blood around the edges of the wound, then clamped the skin edges together with the Kelly hemostat to stop the bleeding. The girl ground her teeth, eyes squeezed shut, but she didn't pull away. Lennox wrapped gauze around her head, tightening it just enough to keep pressure on the wound. Then, she bent the aluminum splint along the curve of the right rib cage, placed it over the broken area, and secured it with 3 rounds of medical tape. Not perfect, but enough to keep the bone from shifting further during movement. She lifted the water bottle to the girl's mouth. Drink slowly, just little sips. If you drink too fast, you'll throw it all back up. The girl drank, each swallow trembling, water spilling from the corner of her mouth and mixing with rain and blood. When the bottle was half empty, the girl opened her eyes and looked at Lennox. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face clearly, bruised, swollen, battered, but the dark brown eyes beneath the dried blood shone in a strange way. the way a person's eyes shine after they've just escaped death and know it. The girl spoke, her voice hoarse from dryness and from being gagged for so many hours. My name is Nadia Valenti. My brother is Carrick Valenti. Lennox's hand, which had been fixing the knot of tape on the rib splint, stopped for one beat, only one beat. Then she kept taping, kept pressing, as if she hadn't heard anything. But she had heard. Lennox had lived in Boston for 7 years before her life collapsed. 7 years as an emergency room nurse, in a city where the name Valenti didn't need explanation. She had never met Carrick Valenti, had never seen his face, but she had bandaged the people he'd sent into the emergency room, and she had seen the way doctors lowered their voices when someone whispered that name in the hallway. She knew who he was, and she knew what territory she had just stepped into. Nadia saw the recognition on Lennox's face. She didn't try to hide it. Instead, she began telling the story, fast, breathless, as if she were afraid that if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to keep speaking. She said she had been driving home from Boston University Law School, on the hilly road west of the city that she took every day. A black SUV forced her onto the shoulder. 2 men dragged her out of the car, pulled a cloth bag over her head, and shoved her into the trunk. She was beaten when she tried to fight back, and that was when her ribs broke. When the cloth bag was removed, she was inside the stone cave, tied to an iron post, surrounded by snakes. A man whose face she had never seen, his voice cold and even, said only one thing to her before he left. Your brother chose his empire over you. We're letting you die the way nature decides. After Nadia finished saying that sentence, she went silent. She didn't cry. She only looked down at her own hands, purple with bruises, swollen, trembling beyond her control. Lennox looked at the 24-year-old girl sitting in the mud beneath the rain, left to die by her own brother's enemies, and she understood one thing with perfect clarity. Whether she wanted it or not, whether she turned her back and walked away right then, her life had been tied to this girl's life from the moment she crawled into that cave, and there was no road back. Lennox was tightening the last knot of medical tape on the rib splint when she saw it. A small red light, blinking steadily like a heartbeat, coming from inside the silver pendant around Nadia's neck. The lightning had flashed just long enough for Lennox to catch that red blink slipping through the thin layer of silver, too steady, too perfectly timed to be a reflection of natural light. She took hold of the pendant and turned it over. A silver circle engraved with a pattern, looking like an ordinary piece of jewelry, but on the back there was a tiny seam almost invisible to the eye. Lennox used the tip of the utility knife blade to pry it open. Inside was a chip smaller than a coin, attached to a flat battery, the red LED light blinking steadily. GPS tracker. Nadia stared at the device in Lennox's hand, her eyes wide. That necklace, she whispered, her voice shaking. Uncle Fletcher gave it to me for my birthday last year. He told me it was Italian silver, a family heirloom from his side. Lennox didn't know who Fletcher was. She didn't need to know. She only knew that this device hadn't been planted by the kidnappers, because if they'd known Nadia had GPS on her body, they would have removed it from the beginning. Someone else had placed this device on the girl before all this. Someone close enough to give her a birthday gift, and someone who had shared this tracking signal with the very people who wanted her dead. Lennox set the pendant on the rock, picked up a stone heavy enough to fill both hands, and smashed it down. The circuit broke, and the red light went out, but she knew that didn't matter anymore. The final signal had already been sent. Anyone monitoring that frequency knew exactly where they had been a few minutes ago, and in the Berkshire's woods at night, a few minutes was more than enough to narrow the search area down to a few hundred square meters. As if to confirm that fear, a sound rose from the valley below. Not thunder. Engines. High, harsh, shrill. The sound of 2-stroke ATVs climbing the slope. And not just one. At least 2, maybe 3, coming from different directions. Lennox shoved the water bottle and the remaining supplies back into the backpack, zipped it, and threw it over her shoulder. She grabbed Nadia's arm and pulled her to her feet. Nadia hissed when her broken ribs took the strain, her face turning ghost white beneath the wet gauze. "Can you walk?" Lennox asked. Nadia nodded, but her eyes said the opposite. It didn't matter. They had no choice. Lennox began leading Nadia into the woods, away from the sound of the engines. 3 years of living in the Berkshires had taught her every slope, every trail, every creek bed within a 10-mile radius of where she parked the Toyota. She knew where the soft ground would hold footprints, where slick stone would break an ankle if stepped on wrong, where the canopy was thick enough to hide them from flashlight beams looking down from above. She didn't take the trail. Trails were traps, and ATVs could move along them 10 times faster than they could walk. Instead, she led Nadia across the hillside, cutting through ferns as high as their chests, gripping exposed tree roots to climb over a sheer rock outcrop that no vehicle could cross. Beneath the outcrop was a small creek, the water higher than usual because of the storm, rushing knee-deep and fast. Lennox pulled Nadia down into the creek, the water so cold Nadia almost screamed, but Lennox pressed a hand over her mouth in time. They waded upstream for about 50 meters, the current carrying away every footprint, every scent, every piece of evidence that they had passed through there. When they climbed onto the opposite bank, Nadia collapsed. The broken ribs she had forced herself to endure the whole way now demanded their price. Every breath was a short, shallow hiss, her body curling in on itself to avoid the pain. But the tighter she curled, the harder it became to breathe, the same spiral Lennox had seen in hundreds of chest trauma patients. She pulled Nadia back against the base of a maple tree, tilting her onto the side without the broken ribs so the good lung had room to expand. "Breathe from your belly," Lennox whispered, placing her hand on Nadia's abdomen to guide her. "Slow. In through your nose. Push your belly out." Nadia obeyed, each breath painful, tears running down her face, but she didn't make a sound. She was running out. Lennox could see it in the way the girl's hands were trembling weaker instead of harder, in the way her eyes were beginning to grow dull instead of terrified, in the way her body was slowly giving up the fight against itself. The sound of the ATVs still echoed through the forest, sometimes far, sometimes close, sweeping the woods in tightening circles. They were getting nearer, and Nadia couldn't go any farther. Lennox heard them before she saw them. The ATV engine from the southeast, clearly closer than it had been 5 minutes earlier, was climbing the slope. Then a second sound came from the northwest, lower, a little farther away, but circling toward them in an arc. 2 vehicles, 2 directions, closing in like a clamp. Lennox swept her eyes across the woods in the next flash of lightning. About 15 meters north of them, a narrow rock crevice split along the hillside, wide enough for 2 people to lie sideways, but too tight for any vehicle to get through. She dragged Nadia there, pushed her in first, then pressed herself in behind her. The smell of damp earth and cold moss covered her face. From the rock crevice, Lennox looked out at the narrow trail running between 2 ancient oak trees about 20 meters away, the only path an ATV could take through this stretch of hillside because both sides were too thick with stone and tree roots. The first ATV appeared. Its headlights swept through the forest, the rider wearing a black raincoat, one hand on the handlebar, the other holding a tactical flashlight and scanning slowly from side to side. He passed the rock crevice without stopping, the flashlight beam sliding less than 3 meters from Lennox's face. When the engine noise faded, Lennox looked down at the trail between the 2 oak trees, then looked into her backpack. Inside was a roll of paracord, about 15 meters long, the kind of parachute cord strong enough to hold more than 240 kilograms. The kind she always carried to string up a rain tarp over the Toyota. She pulled out the roll and spoke to Nadia in a voice that barely made a sound. "Stay here. Don't move. I'll be right back." She crawled out of the rock crevice and ran low to the left oak tree. Her hands tied one end of the cord around the trunk at chest height, pulled it diagonally across to the other oak tree, wrapped it twice, and tightened it hard. The gray paracord was almost invisible in the darkness and rain. She ran back to the rock crevice, lay down beside Nadia, and waited. The second ATV came faster than she had expected. Headlights tore through the trees, the engine roaring as the rider accelerated over a stretch of exposed roots. He was moving fast, too fast for this terrain, confident because he had taken this path once before and knew it went through. When the ATV shot into the space between the 2 oak trees, the paracord caught the rider across the chest with the full momentum of both machine and man behind it. The sound was dry and clean. Not metal striking metal, but the sound of air being knocked out of a grown man's chest. He flew off the seat, his back slammed into the muddy ground, and he slid nearly 2 more meters before he stopped. The riderless ATV reared up, crashed into the base of a tree. Its engine screamed, then died. Lennox ran to him before he could get his breath back. He lay on his back, mouth open and swallowing air like a fish on land, both hands fumbling for something at his hip. Lennox saw it, the Glock 19 tucked into the tactical holster on his right side, and a radio clipped to his chest. She yanked out the Glock first, then tore away the radio. He tried to grab her hand, but the fall had knocked both lungs flat, and he couldn't do anything except lie there and fight for breath. Lennox didn't hit him. She didn't need to. She stepped back, tucked the Glock into the waistband at the back of her pants, clipped the radio to the strap of her backpack, then ran back to the rock crevice and pulled Nadia out. They had to go now. The rider of the first ATV would hear the engine die and turn back to check. Lennox helped Nadia down the northern slope, toward the direction she knew would lead to a second creek, deeper and wider than the one they had crossed before. Nadia was moving noticeably slower. Every time her right foot came down, it dragged a sharp breath through her teeth. Her left hand clutched tight over her broken ribs, and her right hand held onto Lennox, as if she would fall if she let go. When they reached the creek, the water had risen almost to hip level because of the storm, rushing fast enough to sweep away anyone who lost their balance. Lennox guided Nadia down, the cold water soaking through their clothes up to their waists, and she felt Nadia's body lock rigid, the girl shaking violently beyond control. They waded about 60 meters upstream, then climbed onto the rocky bank on the other side. Nadia collapsed the moment her knees touched dry ground. "I can't walk anymore." The girl's voice was no longer a whisper, but a confession of exhaustion, flattened and spent, with no strength left to pretend she was strong. Her eyes were dull, her head tipped to one side, her body slowly shutting down one function at a time like a machine running out of fuel. Lennox knelt, slid one arm under Nadia's armpit, took hold of her waist with the other hand, and lifted her. Nadia had almost no weight left, a 24-year-old body, but light as a child because of dehydration and exhaustion. Lennox carried her onto her back, Nadia's arms looped around her neck, Nadia's head falling against her shoulder, and she began to walk, one step at a time. Another half-mile, not knowing where they were going, not knowing how long they could keep running, but not stopping, unable to stop. Lennox found a shallow hollow beneath the foot of an overhanging rock, enough to shield two people sitting curled up from the rain. Not enough to call it shelter, but enough so Nadia didn't have to lie in the mud. She set Nadia down, leaned the girl's back against the stone wall, checked her breathing, checked that the rib splint was still fixed in place, then sat beside her and looked at the radio clipped to the strap of her backpack. It was still on, the green light blinking, the communication channel open. Lennox unclipped the radio, kept her thumb pressed hard over the mic button to block any sound from their side from transmitting, and turned the volume knob just high enough to hear. Static whispered for a few seconds. Then a man's voice cut through the frequency, clear, sharp, undisguised. "Wade here. Target escaped the cave. Had help. Female. Identity unknown. Vance was taken down on the eastern trail, lost his weapon and radio. We're narrowing the search area north along the big creek." A second voice answered, deeper, slower, the voice of a man used to giving orders and not liking having to repeat himself. "Corvo says bring the girl back alive. He wants to record a video for Valenti before the end. The one helping her doesn't need to live. Clean it up. Leave nothing behind." Lennox felt that sentence like a piece of ice sliding down her spine. Clean it up. She was the one who didn't need to live. She was the thing that would be buried in the forest where no one would find her, where no one would report her missing, because no one in this world knew she was here, and no one in this world was looking for her. Wade's voice cut back across the frequency. Confirmed. Update from Hagen. Valenti still thinks the girl is being held at the Portland warehouse. He sent men to Portland 2 hours ago. He doesn't know we moved her to the Berkshires. Hagen is keeping the information channel clean. Valenti won't get the real coordinates until we're finished. The frequency went silent. Lennox slowly turned to look at Nadia. The girl had heard everything. Nadia's eyes were wide, but not with the same kind of terror she'd had in the snake cave. This was different. This was the look of someone who had just been stabbed with a knife, and the knife had come from the hand she trusted most in the world. She whispered, her voice flattened as if someone had pulled all the air out of her lungs. "Fletcher Hagen." She repeated the name, slower this time, as if she needed to hear herself say it to believe it was real. "Fletcher Hagen. He's Carrick's consigliere. He's been with my family since before I was born. He held me at my father's funeral. I was 6 years old. I couldn't stop crying, and he picked me up. He told me Carrick would take care of me, that Uncle Fletcher would always be there." Nadia looked down at her trembling hands. 18 years. For 18 years, I called him Uncle. For 18 years, he sat at dinner with my family, gave me birthday presents, asked me how school was going, told Carrick he would protect me with his life, and he sold me. He told them my route. He planted GPS in the necklace he gave me. He tied me to an iron post beside a nest of snakes, then made sure my brother would never look in the right place. Nadia didn't scream. She didn't wail. She cried the way Lennox had seen patients cry after being told that someone they loved had died. A cry without words, without sound, just tears running down a bruised and battered face, her whole body shaking in waves like slow electricity was moving through her. Lennox said nothing. There was nothing to say. She didn't know Fletcher Hagen, didn't know the Valenti family, didn't know anything about the world Nadia had grown up in, but she knew betrayal. She knew what it felt like when the person sleeping beside you every night turned out to be the one destroying you from the inside. She knew the moment when the ground vanished beneath your feet, and every beautiful memory was poisoned backward, when every smile you once believed in became a lie, when you realized you had loved a version of someone who never existed. Bradley had done that to her. Fletcher Hagen was doing that to Nadia. Lennox pulled Nadia close, let the girl's head rest against her shoulder, and sat still in the rain. She didn't say everything would be all right, because she didn't know whether it would be. She didn't say I understand, because no one had the right to claim they understood another person's pain. She was simply there, holding the girl, letting the girl cry, and listening to the sound of ATVs in the forest coming closer with every minute. Lennox pulled Nadia to her feet when the ATV engines were close enough that she could tell each one apart. No longer two, at least 4, maybe 5, circling in from 3 directions, driving them north. She helped Nadia run toward the only direction still open, climbing up the hillside through slick, sliding earth, gripping roots, gripping stone, pulling Nadia up meter by meter. Nadia didn't say anything anymore. The girl only clung to Lennox and kept moving, her eyes half closed, her body running on something deeper than will, maybe instinct, maybe only the simple fact that she wasn't ready to die. When they reached the top, Lennox saw it and stopped dead. There was no hilltop, no other slope to run down. The ground ended suddenly, cut off into a sheer cliff, and below it was a thick darkness, and the distant sound of water rising from a ravine whose bottom she couldn't see. Lennox turned back. Behind them, the forest began to light up, not with lightning, but with flashlights. 5 cold white beams cutting through the wet canopy, moving steadily, moving together, coming straight toward them. Then they stopped. 5 figures stepped out of the tree line into the open space before the cliff. Wade Sutter walked in the middle, tall, broad, shouldered, with the gait of a former Special Forces soldier who knew this kind of terrain, his right hand holding a pump shotgun, the barrel angled toward the ground but ready to lift at any second. 4 other men spread out to either side, handguns raised, flashlights mounted beneath the barrels, forming an arc that cut off every escape route. The flashlights shone straight into Lennox's eyes. She lifted her left hand to shield them, and with her right hand, she pulled the Glock 19 from the waistband at the back of her pants. She had never fired a gun in her life. She was a nurse. She put people back together. She didn't shoot them apart. The Glock was heavier than she expected, and her hand shook, not from the cold, but because her body knew what it was holding and refused to cooperate. She stood in front of Nadia, her back to the cliff, shielding the girl with her own body. Wade looked at her, tilted his head, and smiled. There was nothing happy in that smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen this scene many times before and knew how it ended. "Put the gun down. You don't belong in this war." His voice was calm, like he was advising someone not to cross the street on a red light. "This has nothing to do with you. Put the gun down, step aside, and I'll let you walk away." Lennox didn't lower the gun. She didn't know why. She wasn't a hero, wasn't a fighter, wasn't anything this moment required. She was only a woman who had lost everything, standing on the edge of a cliff in the most literal way possible, holding a gun she didn't know how to fire, protecting a girl she had met only a few hours ago, but she didn't step aside. "I've already lost everything." Her voice broke halfway through, but she didn't stop. "She's the only thing worth holding on to tonight." Wade stopped smiling. He looked at her for 1 second, 2 seconds, then raised the shotgun barrel, slowly, steadily, aiming it straight at her chest. He wasn't threatening anymore. He was about to shoot. Lennox closed her eyes, not because she accepted death, but because she didn't want to see it coming. But instead of the shotgun blast, what came first was light, white, blinding, so powerful it pierced through Lennox's closed eyelids and turned the darkness blood red. She opened her eyes. The entire hillside above them had flared bright as day. 5 pairs of high-powered LED headlights, the kind mounted on civilian armored vehicles she had once seen carrying businessmen through downtown Boston, were shining straight down into the clearing. Wade turned, one hand covering his eyes, the shotgun lowering by instinct. His 4 gunmen froze, blinded, disoriented. At the top of the hillside, 5 glossy black Cadillac Escalades were parked in a horizontal line. Engines silent, headlights blazing at full strength. The doors opened all at once, not in a rush, but together, in the same rhythm, like a movement that had been rehearsed. From each vehicle stepped 4 or 5 men. Black suits, Kevlar vests over them, armed, moving in absolute silence. No shouting, no orders, no warnings. 23 men spread into an arc, surrounding Corvo's 5 gunmen from 3 sides, with the cliff on the 4th. Perfect, not a single gap, not a single path out. Wade understood. He understood before anyone else did. The shotgun slipped from his hand and fell into the mud. He raised both hands. The other 4 gunmen followed, weapons dropping, knees touching the wet ground. From the middle escalade, a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, a long black coat falling to his knees, his right hand holding a tactical Benelli M4 shotgun, the barrel angled down, his finger outside the trigger guard. His face showed no expression. No anger, no fear, no relief, nothing at all. Only his eyes. And those eyes were sweeping the clearing for one thing, and one thing only. When that gaze found Nadia, sitting against the cliff behind Lennox, her head wrapped in blood, wet gauze, one hand clutching her side, alive, but barely alive, the man's face didn't change, but his stride did. The first step from the vehicle to the ground was the step of a kingpin. The second step toward Nadia was the step of a brother. Carrick Valenti ignored Wade, kneeling in the mud as if he didn't exist. Ignored the 23 men standing in formation around them. Ignored Lennox holding the Glock with shaking hands. He went straight to Nadia, knelt in front of his sister, and Nadia collapsed into his chest. "I thought you chose the Empire instead of me." Nadia's voice shattered, muffled against the fabric of her brother's coat, sounding like the voice of the 6-year-old child she had once been. Not the 24-year-old law student she was now. Carrick held his sister, both arms closing tight around her, and for the first time that night, his voice changed. No longer cold, no longer controlled, broken. "Hagen told me you were in Portland. I sent men to Portland. I didn't know you were here." Carrick held Nadia in his arms for a long while, long enough that the 23 men standing around them had to look away because none of them had ever seen their boss like this. Then he stood. He gently passed Nadia to the nearest man and spoke briefly, his voice already cold as steel again. "Get my sister to the car. Call Dr. Whelan to the mansion immediately." The man nodded, carried Nadia on his back up the hillside toward the convoy. Then Carrick turned to Lennox. For the first time that night, he truly looked at her. Not a glance, not a look through her, but the kind of look a man gave something he had never encountered and didn't yet know where to place in his world. He saw a woman soaked from head to toe, her clothes smeared with mud and blood, dark brown hair pasted to her face, thin enough that her collarbones jutted beneath the neckline of her shirt. Her right hand was still holding the Glock 19, but the barrel pointed down toward the ground, and her 5 fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to it. On her back was a frayed emergency backpack, its strap sewn back together with ordinary thread at least twice. The shoes on her feet had worn through the soles, one split open at the toe, her toes showing through the tear. He looked down at Nadia as she was being taken to the vehicle. He looked at the gauze wrapped around his sister's head. Clean, even, tight enough. The kind of bandaging he recognized at once as the work of someone properly trained, not an amateur. He looked at the aluminum splint securing her ribs, bent along the correct curve of the bone, fixed in the right place. Someone had cared for his sister in the middle of a storm, soaked forest with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. He looked back at Lennox. Then he did something the 23 men standing there would remember for the rest of their lives. Carrick Valenti took off his long black coat. Loro Piana cashmere, custom-tailored, the kind of coat whose price equaled the money Lennox hadn't touched in 3 years. He stepped in front of her and placed the coat over her shoulders. Not a word. No thank you. No explanation. No question about her name. He only draped the coat over her shoulders, then looked straight into her eyes for one moment. That look wasn't warm. It wasn't gentle. But it said one thing that every man standing on that hillside understood immediately. Because in their world, language didn't need words, and the boss's coat placed over someone's shoulders meant more clearly than any order ever could. A middle-aged woman with short, dark red hair and a razor-sharp face stood beside the first escalade, watching the whole scene with eyes that missed nothing. Orla Kinney, underboss of the Valenti family, a former Interpol investigator, the only woman in the organization with the right to speak plainly to Carrick. She turned to the man nearest her and spoke just loud enough to be heard. Remember her face. Anyone who touches her dies. After that, everything became blurred in Lennox's memory. She remembered someone leading her to a vehicle, remembered the smell of leather in the back seat of the Escalade, remembered Nadia lying on a portable medical stretcher in the vehicle beside them, remembered someone handing her a bottle of water and her drinking all of it without breathing. Then someone took her back to her Toyota Corolla, parked in the abandoned lot at the edge of the woods more than 10 miles away, and she didn't remember when she fell asleep. She woke when the October sunlight shone through the dusty windshield. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. It took a few more seconds to realize something was different. She was wearing a long black cashmere coat, softer than anything she had ever touched, and it covered almost all of her like a blanket. Last night hadn't been a nightmare. She turned toward the passenger seat. A brown paper bag held food that was still warm, steam clinging inside, the smell of eggs and toasted bread, a sealed bottle of water, and a white business card. No name, no logo, no address, only a phone number written by hand in black ink, the handwriting sharp and slanting to the right. Lennox held the business card, turned it over, and back again. Nothing else. Only the phone number. She set it down, opened the car door, and stepped outside. The morning air was cold and clear, carrying the smell of damp leaves after rain. The abandoned lot was familiar, the place where she had parked her car for the past 4 months. Quiet, empty, like every other morning she had woken there. Except for one thing. On the dirt road running along the lot, 5 glossy black Cadillac Escalades were parked in a row, about 20 meters from her Toyota. Engines off, windows pitch black, impossible to see inside. No one stepped out. No one honked. There was no sign of how long they had been there or how long they intended to stay. They were just there, silent, waiting. Lennox stood beside her rusted car, wearing the cashmere coat of the most powerful man on the east coast of the United States, looking at $5 million vehicles parked in front of her, and she understood that her life, from this second on, would never be the same again. She just didn't know yet whether that was the best thing or the worst thing that had ever happened to her. The door of the first Escalade opened, and Orla Kinney stepped out. In the morning, without darkness and storm rain, Lennox could see her more clearly. Middle-aged, dark red hair cut at chin length, wearing a dark brown leather jacket over a white shirt, black trousers, flat shoes, dressed like someone used to moving fast when necessary. She walked toward Lennox without rushing, both hands empty, no visible weapon, with the gait of someone who wanted to talk, not threaten. "Mr. Valenti wants to thank you properly," Orla said, stopping a few steps away from Lennox, her voice flat, neutral, not overly friendly, and not cold. "And honestly, you're sleeping in a car in an abandoned lot." Lennox looked at her, looked at the 5 Escalades, then looked back at her own Toyota Corolla with the cracked windshield, the back seat piled with clothes in black garbage bags, and the empty water bottle rolling around on the floor. Orla was right. She was sleeping in a car in an abandoned lot. She had been sleeping in a car in an abandoned lot for 3 years, and now she was wearing the cashmere coat of the biggest Mafia boss on the east coast of the United States. She didn't have many reasons to refuse. The ride to Brookline took 40 minutes. Lennox sat alone in the back seat of the second Escalade, the pitch-black window glass keeping her from seeing the vehicle ahead and the vehicle behind, but she knew they were there. When the convoy turned onto a white gravel road running between 2 rows of red maple trees, Lennox saw the Valenti mansion for the first time, and she understood that the word rich, as she had known it before, meant nothing at all. A Georgian-style mansion, 3 stories tall, with a dark red brick facade, perfectly symmetrical white-trimmed windows, a gray slate roof, and 2 wrought iron gates at the front already standing open. The lawn was cut with absolute precision. Not a single fallen leaf, green hedges trimmed into sharp squares along the natural stone walkway. Armed guards stood at the gate, at the corners of the house, at the entrance to the garden, silent, their eyes constantly scanning. Inside was even more overwhelming. Italian marble floors with gray veins, original paintings hanging on the walls, and Lennox didn't know the names of the artists, but she knew each painting cost more money than she would ever earn in her entire life. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, the smell of oak and leather, and something very faint like lilies. It was so quiet she could hear the sound of her own shoes on the stone. This world was luxurious and cold. Cold in the way a place is when there's no laughter, no music, no sign that anyone lives there because they want to, rather than because they have to. Orla led her to the second floor, through a hallway lined with family photographs in silver frames, and stopped before a double oak door. She knocked twice, didn't wait for an answer, opened the door, and stepped aside so Lennox could enter. Carrick Valenti's office. Dark walnut-paneled walls, bookshelves covering all four sides, a solid wood desk placed before a large window overlooking the back garden. Carrick sat behind the desk. For the first time, Lennox saw him in daylight, without mud, without rain, without a shotgun. A gray three-piece suit, white shirt, no tie, the collar open by one button, black hair combed back, a few silver strands at the temples, blue-gray eyes, sharp, cold, the kind of eyes that looked at people not to see them, but to read them. He didn't stand when she entered. He only sat there, both hands resting on the surface of the desk, and watched her walk from the door to the middle of the room with the patience of a man who never had to hurry. "I owe you my sister's life," he said, his voice low, even, with no emotion slipping through. "In my world, that's a debt that can't be fully repaid. Tell me what you need." Lennox stood in the middle of the room, still wearing his cashmere coat because no one had taken it back and she had nothing else to wear. Her old emergency backpack hanging from one shoulder, her hair still a little damp from the night before. She had thought about this question for the entire 40-minute ride. Not about what she wanted, but about what she dared to ask for. "I need my federal conviction erased." Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. "I need my nursing license restored. I want to be myself again." Carrick looked at her without blinking for a few seconds. Then he nodded once, slightly, slowly, as if she had just asked for something he had already predicted. "Erasing a federal conviction takes time, but I can do it. In the meantime, you'll stay here." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order, spoken in the flat voice of a man used to hearing yes instead of no. Lennox understood. She had just stepped into a golden cage, but this cage had high ceilings, hot water, and a door that might lead back to the old life she had thought was gone forever. She nodded. Orla led her to a room on the third floor, a guest room 10 times larger than her Toyota, with a bed covered in white sheets, a private bathroom, and an empty wardrobe waiting. Before Orla left, Lennox asked a question Orla hadn't expected. "My emergency backpack. Almost all the medicine inside has expired. I need to restock it. Betadine, sterile gauze, medical tape, and if you have it, naloxone." Orla looked at her for a moment, then nodded. She led Lennox to the medical supply cabinet in a room downstairs in the basement. A stainless steel cabinet fully stocked with everything from antibiotics to morphine to naloxone, the kind of cabinet any family operating in a world where fentanyl was currency had to have. Lennox took what she needed, packed it neatly into her backpack, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt that her hands were holding the things they had been made to hold. That afternoon, while Lennox was sitting alone in the room, looking out at a garden she didn't belong to, the door opened. Nadia stood there, her head still wrapped in gauze, one hand holding her ribs, wearing loose, oversized pajamas. The girl didn't say anything. She only stepped inside, sat down beside Lennox on the edge of the bed, and rested her head on her shoulder. The two women sat still in a strange room, in a strange house, in the middle of a strange world, but a shoulder leaning against another shoulder wasn't strange. Because there are things only people who have survived together can share, and they don't need a single word to explain them. 3 days after the night in the Berkshires, Orla led Fletcher Hagen down to the mansion's wine cellar. Lennox wasn't invited to witness it. No one was invited. But at 11 o'clock at night, the mansion became quiet in a way she had begun to recognize as meaning something was happening downstairs. The kind of quiet that made guards stand straighter, look more directly ahead, and kept everyone from passing through the basement hallway. Lennox hadn't meant to go down there. She was sitting on the second-floor stairs with Nadia, the girl having fallen asleep against her shoulder after taking the pain medicine Dr. Whelan had prescribed. But after Lennox laid Nadia down on the sofa and covered her with a blanket, her feet didn't carry her back to her room. They carried her down the stairs, through the first-floor hallway, to the heavy door leading down to the wine cellar, where a strip of yellow light slipped through the edge of a door that hadn't been fully closed. She stood there, and she listened. Carrick's voice drifted up from inside, low, even, never rising. That was what frightened her most. People shouted when they were angry. People screamed when they lost control. Carrick Valenti didn't shout and didn't scream. He spoke in the voice people used to read a will. You held Nadia when she was 6 years old. On the day of my father's funeral, you taught me how to tie a necktie because I was 19 and had never worn a tie to a funeral before. You told me you would stand beside me, that I wasn't alone, that my father would be proud if he could see me rise and carry this family, and you sold my sister to a nest of snakes. Silence. Not empty silence, but heavy silence, the kind Lennox could feel through the door like a physical force. Then a second voice, older, rougher, but not shaking. Fletcher Hagen answered. You don't understand, Carrick. Your father built this empire with blood and principles. He had rules, honor, lines no one was allowed to cross. You took over, and what did you do? You modernized. You wore suits, bought real estate, laundered money through legitimate companies, turned the family into a corporation. You abandoned the men who bled for your father. You betray his legacy every day you sit in that office and pretend you're a businessman. Lennox heard the sound of a chair dragging across the stone floor, slowly, as if Carrick were rising to his feet one deliberate inch at a time. Then his voice came again, still low, still even, but something underneath it had changed. My father's legacy. You're speaking to me about my father's legacy. Let me ask you one question, Fletcher. The night my father was shot, who gave the other side the information about his route? Silence. This time the silence stretched long, and Lennox felt its nature change, from defensive silence into the silence of a man driven into a corner. Carrick continued, I spent 18 years believing my father died because of the war with the Moreno family. I spent 18 years taking revenge on the wrong people, but just 2 days ago, when Orla extracted the data from Nadia's broken necklace and traced the hidden signal, she found an encrypted communication network between you and Corvo that went back 18 years. And inside that network, there was a message sent by you to Corvo shortly after the assassination, saying, clean up the old records. Make sure the Moreno route is never reopened. You didn't want anyone digging back into my father's case, because if someone dug deep enough, they would find you at the bottom, the heavy breathing of an old man. Then Hagen's voice, shaking now, not much, but enough. You can't prove that. I don't need to prove it. Carrick's voice didn't change by a single note. I'm not a court. Lennox heard Carrick's footsteps moving toward the door, then his voice speaking to someone, probably Orla. Take him to Bear's Mouth Cave. Tie him exactly where Nadia was tied. To that same iron post. Let nature decide. Lennox stepped back from the door, her back pressing against the hallway wall, her heart pounding so fast she could hear it in her own ears. She heard Hagen being dragged away, heard shoes scraping over the stone floor, heard the old man start to say something before he was cut off by the sound of an iron door closing. Then silence. Lennox stood in the dark hallway, afraid to breathe too loudly, and looked through the wine cellar door, which had opened a few more inches. Carrick was sitting alone in the chair Hagen had just occupied. The room had only one low-hanging yellow bulb, lighting half his face while the other half sank into shadow. Both his hands rested on his thighs. They were shaking. Carrick Valenti, the man whose own men hadn't heard him raise his voice in 5 years, the man who had just ordered an old man tied inside a snake cave without changing the rhythm of his breathing, was sitting alone in the wine cellar with both hands trembling beyond his control. His eyes were fixed on the opposite wall. Hanging there was a black and white photograph in a bronze frame, a picture of a middle-aged man in a suit, black hair combed back like Carrick's, eyes like Carrick's, smiling into the camera. His father, the man he had thought died because of an enemy, the man who had actually died because of the person who had sat across from him at dinner for 18 years. Carrick didn't cry. Lennox stood outside the door long enough to know that. He didn't cry, didn't break anything, didn't scream. He only sat there, looking at his father's picture, both hands shaking, silent. and that silence was heavier than any crying Lennox had ever heard in her life. Heavier than the crying of patients who had lost loved ones on the emergency room table, heavier than her own crying on the first night she slept in her car after the court handed down her sentence. Lennox didn't step inside. She had no right to enter that pain, and she knew it. But she didn't leave either. She stood outside the wine cellar door, her back against the wall, and she stayed there, saying nothing, moving not at all, until the yellow bulb inside went out, and Carrick's heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs leading up the other way. 1 week inside the Valenti mansion, and Lennox began to lose the ability to sleep. Not because the bed wasn't soft. The bed was softer than anything she had ever lain on, so soft that her body rejected it the way it rejected something that didn't belong to her. The problem was everything else. Cameras in every corner of the hallway, guards standing by the stairs, by the garden door, by the front gate, their eyes following her every time she walked from her room down to the kitchen for water. The window in her room looked out over the garden, but it couldn't open more than 20 centimeters because of the security lock. And there was the feeling that every footstep she took inside this house was being noted by someone, reported, recorded, stored away. 3 years of living on the street. 3 years of going wherever she wanted, stopping whenever she wanted, sitting alone in the woods all day without anyone asking questions, had turned freedom into something she needed the way she needed air. And the Valenti mansion, beautiful as it was, safe as it was, with hot water and food every day, was a cage. On the morning of the 9th day, while Nadia was still asleep and Orla was in the basement meeting with the security team, Lennox put on jeans and a light jacket, slung her emergency backpack over her shoulder out of habit, and went down to the first floor. She didn't go out the front door. She went through the kitchen, out the back door leading into the garden, walked along the hedge taller than her head to the west side gate, a small iron gate used by the gardening crew to come and go, a 4-digit lock, the code she had seen the gardener enter 2 days before. She pressed the numbers, the gate opened, and she stepped outside. No one stopped her. The town of Brookline was a 20-minute walk away. Lennox walked along the sidewalk between pretty houses with trimmed lawns, beneath maple trees whose leaves had turned red and orange, and for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, she felt her lungs open all the way. She found a small coffee shop on the corner, the kind with old wooden chairs and the smell of freshly ground coffee, ordered an Americano with the last few coins in her pocket, and sat by the window watching people walk along the street. Normal. Everything was normal, and that normalcy was so precious she almost cried. She sat there for more than an hour. Then she walked back. Her mistake wasn't leaving the mansion. Her mistake was taking the same road back. The white van was parked at the curb about 400 meters from the side gate, on an empty stretch of street with no houses, only the concrete wall of an old industrial zone. She didn't see it until the side door slid open, and 2 men stepped out. Fast, professional. One blocking her from the front, the other from behind. She managed to turn, but someone's hand had already grabbed the strap of her backpack and yanked her backward. Another hand covered her mouth with a damp cloth, and she was lifted, shoved into the van, the sliding door closing behind her. Inside, it was dark, smelling of motor oil and plastic. Someone tied her hands with plastic zip ties, the kind she knew far too well. When the cloth was pulled from her mouth, she was sitting on the concrete floor of an abandoned industrial warehouse, the ceiling 10 meters high, most of the glass windows shattered, afternoon light falling through in diagonal streaks across the dusty floor. Wade Sutter sat on a folding chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees, watching her with eyes she recognized immediately, even though she had only seen them once in the darkness on the cliff. He wasn't in a hurry. He asked in a calm voice, "How many guards are in the mansion? Camera positions, patrol schedule, which floor Carrick's bedroom was on, where Nadia's room was." Lennox didn't answer. Wade asked again. Lennox didn't answer. Wade stood, walked over, and hit her. Not the way people hit in movies. Quick, clean, one blow. He hit like a man who knew exactly where to strike to cause the most pain without breaking bone, because broken bone meant wasted time, and he needed information, not a patient. The back of his hand whipped across her face, her cheekbone rang, and she fell sideways. He pulled her upright, asked again. She didn't answer. He hit her again. Her lips split, blood running down her chin and dripping onto the concrete floor. The third time he asked, Lennox spat blood onto the floor and said, her voice warped by her swollen lip, but every word clear, I don't betray people who trust me. I've been betrayed enough to know how much it hurts. Wade looked at her for a few seconds, tilting his head as if reconsidering something. Then he sat back down on the folding chair, pulled out his phone, and started calling. He didn't know that 20 minutes earlier, Orla Kinney had discovered Lennox's room empty. The garden camera had recorded her leaving through the side gate, and the Brookline town security cameras, which the Valenti technical team had access to, had captured the white van. Orla called Carrick. She spoke briefly, stated the facts, added no opinion, but she didn't need to add an opinion. Carrick said nothing over the phone. He only put it down, stood, and walked to the door. Orla told the two men accompanying him that this was the first time in 7 years of working for Carrick Valenti that she had seen him leave his desk and get in a car himself without assigning the task to someone else first. He gave no orders. He drove the Escalade. Orla sat in the passenger seat, and 3 vehicles followed behind. The technical team located the van through the GPS, attached to the phone of one of Corvo's 2 foot soldiers, whom Orla had already been tracking. An industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Watertown, a 17-minute drive from the mansion. Carrick arrived in 12 minutes. When the warehouse door burst open, Wade hadn't had time to finish the call. He and his 2 men were restrained in less than 30 seconds. Carrick walked into the warehouse, saw Lennox sitting on the concrete floor, hands bound, face bruised, dried blood on her chin, and he stopped. Only for one beat that Orla saw, that the 2 men behind him saw, and that they would repeat to the others in the organization in less than an hour. Then he walked to her, knelt down, drew a knife, and cut the zip ties from her wrists. He didn't ask if she was all right. He looked at the bruise on her face, looked at her torn lip, then turned toward Wade, who was being pinned to the floor by 3 men. He said nothing to Wade, only looked, and that look was more frightening than any threat Lennox had ever heard. He helped her to her feet, one hand holding her elbow, then led her out to the vehicle. On the ride back to the mansion, sitting in the back seat of the Escalade, Lennox heard Orla speaking quietly to someone over the phone. The boss went himself to save her. Himself. Never before. Not family. Not blood. Not anyone in the organization. An outsider. And Orla's voice, the voice of the coldest woman Lennox had ever met, carried a note Lennox couldn't identify as worry or admiration. Carrick didn't take her to Dr. Whelan. He took her to the medical room on the first floor, the small room with the stainless steel cabinet, the white leather examination bed, and the cold fluorescent light, then closed the door. Just the 2 of them. Lennox sat on the edge of the examination bed, her emergency backpack beside her, the left side of her face swollen, her lower lip split in a cut nearly 2 centimeters long. The bleeding stopped now, but crusted black along her chin. She intended to do it herself. She had been taking care of her own wounds for 3 years, needing no one, wanting no one. But Carrick had opened the medicine cabinet, taken out gauze, betadine, and medical tape, laid them on the stainless steel tray beside the examination bed, and stood in front of her with a piece of betadine-soaked gauze in his hand. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds. Then Lennox sat still, and Carrick began cleaning the wound on her face. His hands were large, his fingers long, the hands of a man used to holding guns and signing documents that decided other people's fates. But when his fingers held her chin and tilted it to one side so he could wipe the dried blood beneath her jaw, his touch was so light that Lennox almost couldn't feel it. He wasn't used to doing this. She saw it in the way he hesitated before touching the gauze to the edge of the split in her lip, in the way he stopped when she winced, in the way he looked at the betadine on the gauze, as if he wasn't sure he was using the right thing. Carrick Valenti, the man who ran a billion-dollar empire, the man who ordered traitors dealt with without blinking, was standing in a medical room trying to clean a cut on the lip of a woman he didn't know how to name, and the most powerful hands on the east coast of the United States were trying not to hurt her. Lennox looked at him while he focused on the wound, and she said, "You have 23 people willing to die for you." Carrick didn't look up. His hand kept wiping. "But none of them ask whether you're in pain." His hand stopped. The gauze was still touching the edge of her lip, his fingers still holding her chin, but both of them froze. He looked up, and for the first time since she had met him, Lennox saw something behind those blue-gray eyes besides control. Not pain. Not yet. But surprise. The kind of surprise that comes when a man is struck from an angle he wasn't guarding, with a weapon he never thought anyone would use. Truth. He set the gauze down on the tray, stood straight, stepped back half a step, and looked at her from a distance that seemed safer to him. "You shouldn't be here, Lennox." His voice was lower than usual. Not the voice of command, the voice of a man saying something he himself didn't want to say. "I know," Lennox answered, "but I don't want you to leave." The sentence hung in the air of the medical room, beneath the cold fluorescent light, between the smell of betadine and the leather scent from the coat he wore. Lennox felt the weight of that sentence, felt the cost of it, because she knew men like Carrick didn't say things like that without paying for them with something inside themselves they had kept locked away for years. And because she felt that, she spoke plainly. "I don't want to be anyone's pawn on a chessboard." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't accusing. It was only the truth, spoken in the voice of someone who had paid enough to earn the right to say it. "I was Bradley's pawn once. My husband. I trusted him. I loved him. I built my life around him. And he used me as a front for his trafficking network. When he was arrested, I was the one who lost everything. He got a reduced sentence for cooperating. I ended up on the street. It destroyed me." She looked straight into Carrick's eyes. "I'd rather go back to sleeping in my car in that abandoned lot than let that happen again." Carrick looked at her. For a long time. Not the assessing look from that first meeting in his office. The look of a man listening to something he needed to hear, even though it hurt. Then he spoke, slowly, choosing every word. "You're not a pawn." He paused for one beat. "You're the first person who walked into a snake cave for someone you'd never met. I pay millions of dollars every year for loyalty, and I couldn't buy 1/10 of what you did for free that night." He stepped to the sink, turned on the water, and washed the betadine from his fingers, not looking at her as he continued. "I don't know how to treat a person like you. In my world, there are no people like you. But I'm trying." Water ran in the sink. The fluorescent light hummed above them. Lennox sat on the examination bed and looked at his back, at his shoulders bending slightly forward, at the way he washed his hands longer than necessary, because he was using that time to gather back something he had just let slip. She didn't say anything more. He didn't say anything more either. But when he turned off the water, dried his hands, and walked out of the medical room, he stopped at the door, didn't turn around, and said, "The medicine cabinet stays open. Restock anything you need for your backpack." Then he left. The door closed. Lennox sat alone in the medical room, her lips still bleeding lightly through the betadine, and she realized that for the first time in 3 years, she was afraid. Not afraid of being hit. Not afraid of being abandoned. Not afraid of hunger or cold. Afraid because she had just felt something she had thought Bradley had killed forever inside her, and it was coming back to life in the most dangerous place possible, with the most dangerous man possible. 11 days after the Berkshire's night, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary that no one believed anything could possibly happen, Nadia was sitting at the kitchen island eating breakfast, the strawberry and banana smoothie the chef made for her every morning placed in front of her, her ribs hurting less now, enough that she could sit upright without wincing, the cut on her forehead healing, the gauze removed, only a thin, dark red line left where new skin was beginning to pull together. She finished the smoothie, talked with Lennox about wanting to return to law school after winter break, then went up to the second-floor sitting room to read. 40 minutes later, Lennox passed the sitting room on her way from the medical room to her own room, after just reorganizing her emergency backpack. Nadia was lying on the sofa, the book face down on her chest, her eyes closed. She looked as if she were asleep. Anyone walking past would have thought she was asleep. Lennox almost kept walking. Almost. But something made her feet stop. Something that 3 years away from the profession hadn't erased. Something that thousands of shifts in the emergency department had carved into her nervous system so deeply that it worked before conscious thought. Nadia's breathing. Too slow. Lennox stepped to the sofa, knelt down, and looked. Nadia's chest barely moved. She counted. 1 breath. 6 seconds. 2 breaths. 12 seconds. 3 breaths. 18 seconds. 6 times a minute. Normal was 12 to 20. 6 was dangerous. 6 in a young, healthy person wasn't normal under any circumstance. Lennox lifted Nadia's eyelid. Her pupils were narrowed to the size of pinpoints, almost nothing but a tiny black dot in the middle of the brown iris. Pinpoint pupils. Lennox looked down. Nadia's lips were faintly blue. Not bruised blue from injury, but blue-gray from lack of oxygen. Her fingertips were the same, gray beneath the nails. Every sign matched in Lennox's mind at once. Fast, precise, cold, according to the exact protocol she had run hundreds of times. Respiratory failure from opioids, breathing under 8, constricted pupils, cyanosis, opioid overdose, stage 3, moving toward respiratory arrest, she shouted. The shout rang across the second floor, through the walls, down the stairs, out into the hallway. Emergency. Call 911 now. Without waiting for anyone to come, Lennox rolled Nadia onto her left side in the recovery position, one hand opening her mouth to check that the airway wasn't blocked, the other placed beneath her neck to tilt her head back so her tongue wouldn't fall into her throat. Nadia didn't respond. Her eyes stayed closed, her body limp as a rag doll. Her breathing dropped to 4. Lennox ran into the hallway, snatched her emergency backpack from her room 10 steps away, ran back, knelt on the floor beside the sofa, opened the backpack, and pulled out the box of naloxone she had restocked from the mansion's medicine cabinet, exactly as Carrick had told her. The medicine cabinet stays open. Restock anything you need. She tore open the packaging, took out the pre-filled syringe of 400 micrograms, pulled up Nadia's pant leg, drove the needle into the middle of her outer thigh through the fabric, and pressed, counted, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. No response. Nadia's breathing fell to 3. Her lips shifted from pale blue to deep blue. Lennox began chest compressions, both hands stacked together, the heel of her palm placed in the center of the sternum, pressing hard, steady, 5 centimeters deep, at a rate of 100 compressions a minute, exactly the protocol for cardiopulmonary resuscitation that her body performed automatically, like a machine already programmed. Press, press, press. After 30 compressions, she tilted Nadia's head, lifted her chin, sealed her mouth over Nadia's, gave 2 breaths, watched the chest rise, then continued compressions. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Guards shouted to one another. The sitting room door flew open. Carrick Valenti rushed into the room and stopped dead. Lennox was kneeling on the marble floor beside the sofa, both hands pressing on his sister's chest, rhythmic, strong, continuous. Her face so calm it was frightening. No fear, no panic, not a single drop of emotion beyond absolute focus. Blood from the split in her still unhealed lip dripped onto Nadia's chest with each compression, but she didn't notice, didn't care, didn't stop. In the middle of the 60th compression, the naloxone began to work. Nadia jerked, sucked in a sharp breath like someone just pulled up from underwater, her back arching off the sofa, her eyes flying open though they weren't seeing anything yet. Lennox immediately rolled her onto her side, held her head, and Nadia coughed, choked, then began to breathe. Shallow, fast, difficult, but breathing. Lennox sat back on her heels, both hands still on Nadia, ready to start compressions again if needed, and counted her breaths. 8, 10, 12. Climbing. Her pupils began to widen again. Her lips shifted from blue to pale pink. She turned to Carrick, who was standing 3 steps away, his face drained white, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She spoke in the voice of a nurse, not the voice of someone living in his house. Someone gave her an opioid, fentanyl, or something equivalent, in her food or drink this morning. Call 911. She needs a continuous intravenous naloxone drip and monitoring in the intensive care unit for at least 24 hours, because fentanyl can come back after the naloxone wears off. And find out who did this. Carrick looked at her 2 hands, stained with her own blood, resting on his sister's chest. Looked at the frayed emergency backpack lying open on the floor, the empty naloxone syringe beside it. Looked at the way she still kept her hands on Nadia, ready, refusing to leave, not shaking. And he understood, more clearly than at any moment before, that this wasn't a woman who had been brave once inside a snake cave. This was her nature. Her hands had been made to keep other people alive, and they never stopped doing that, no matter where she was, no matter who she was in the eyes of the world. 4 hours later, Orla traced the source. A kitchen employee, a man named Garrett, had worked inside the mansion for 7 months, with a clean record, hired through a reputable staffing company. But Orla found a second bank account under Garrett's mother's name, receiving 3 transfers from a shell company Orla had already linked to Corvo. Mansion security tightened that very night. Every employee who wasn't original to the family was vetted again from the beginning. Food and drinks were placed under Orla's direct control, and Lennox, The homeless woman who had saved Nadia Valenti for the second time with the same emergency backpack she hadn't been able to throw away for 3 years, became the only person outside the family whom Carrick trusted absolutely. Carrick didn't sleep for 2 straight nights after the poisoning. Lennox knew because she saw the light in the second-floor office still burning every time she woke at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to check on Nadia at the hospital through the phone Orla had given her. Nadia stayed in the intensive care unit at Mass General for 24 hours, on a continuous intravenous naloxone drip, and was discharged on the afternoon of the second day, with monitoring medication and an absolute order not to eat anything that hadn't been checked directly by Orla. On the third night, Carrick summoned Orla into his office and closed the door for 4 hours. When the door opened, Orla walked out with a USB in her hand and a list of 23 phone numbers written on paper. The endgame began. The next morning, Orla drove to a coffee shop in Cambridge and sat across from a 44-year-old man in a gray coat, his hair cut short, his face belonging to someone more used to looking at criminal files than looking at the sun, Special Agent Bennett Cross, FBI, the man in charge of the Valenti file for 7 years. Orla placed the USB in front of Cross. Inside was the evidence Cross had been searching for 3 years and never had. The fentanyl transaction records of Paxton Corvo, the transport route from Mexico through the port of New Bedford, the buyer list, the money laundering account numbers running through 4 shell companies in Vermont and New Hampshire, and the recording of a call between Corvo and Garrett, the kitchen employee planted inside the mansion, in which Corvo clearly ordered the fentanyl dosage to be mixed into Nadia's food. Cross looked at the USB, then looked at Orla. "What does Valenti want in return?" Orla didn't smile. "Mr. Valenti doesn't want anything from the FBI. He only wants Corvo gone. How that happens is up to you, gentlemen." Orla stood and left, leaving Cross sitting alone with the USB he knew would change his career, and Cross also knew that Carrick Valenti was using him as a tool. But the evidence was real, the crimes were real, and Corvo deserved to be arrested no matter who had supplied the information. That same night, the Valenti force moved. 23 men split into 6 teams, moving simultaneously to 6 of Corvo's transit points, stretching from Springfield to Burlington. No gunfire, no explosions. They simply arrived, seized the product, locked the warehouses, and disappeared before anyone could make a call. In 4 hours, Corvo's entire transport network was cut apart, as if it had never existed. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the FBI raided Corvo's farm on the outskirts of Stowe, Vermont. Corvo and 14 of his men were arrested on the spot, face down on the warehouse floor, while agents uncovered more than 200 kilograms of fentanyl, 30 guns, and $400,000 in cash. Corvo didn't get to make a single phone call. His empire collapsed in one night, crushed between 2 jaws closing around him that he hadn't seen until it was too late. But Wade Sutter wasn't at the Vermont farm. Wade had disappeared from Orla's radar after managing to evade capture during the chaos of Nadia's rescue at the cliff, as Carrick had prioritized getting his sister home safely over securing the perimeter. The Brookline mansion was at its thinnest since Lennox had arrived. Most of the force was still at the 6 transit points and hadn't made it back in time. Only 7 guards remained, spread across the gate and the first floor. Orla was in Cambridge monitoring the FBI's response. Carrick was in his office on the phone with the Burlington team. Nadia was asleep on the 3rd floor, and Lennox was in the 1st floor medical room, alone, reorganizing the medicine cabinet after restocking backup naloxone. The white van marked Medical Express Delivery stopped in front of the garden side gate at 5:12. The driver wore a delivery uniform, a baseball cap, and carried a white foam box labeled Medical Supplies Urgent. He rang the bell and told the gate guard this was the emergency medication order placed after the poisoning, delivered under Mrs. Kinney's instructions. The guard checked the list. After Nadia's poisoning, the mansion had placed 3 emergency medical orders over the past 2 days. 1 order hadn't arrived yet. He opened the gate. Wade Sutter stepped into the Valenti mansion for the first time, the foam box in his hand, and inside it there was no medicine, only a 7-inch Ka-Bar knife. He didn't go looking for Nadia. He asked the guard where the medical room was, because he needed to deliver the medicine directly to the person in charge of medical supplies. The guard pointed the way. Wade walked down the 1st floor hallway, opened the medical room door, and saw Lennox standing with her back turned, arranging boxes of naloxone inside the steel cabinet. She turned when she heard the door. The 2 of them looked at each other. Lennox recognized him instantly. That face, those eyes, that smile. She had seen him on the cliff. She had seen him in the Watertown warehouse when he hit her. Wade closed the medical room door behind him, pulled the knife from the foam box, and stepped toward her. This time, it wasn't about a mission. This time, it was personal. She had ruined everything. The snake cave, the chase, the warehouse, every failure had her in it. Lennox backed up. Her back touched the steel cabinet. No Glock, no knife, no way out except the door Wade was blocking. Only the medicine cabinet behind her, and the emergency backpack on the examination bed one step away. Her eyes swept down to the backpack, open, and she saw it. A pre-filled epinephrine injector, the kind of auto-injector used for anaphylactic shock. A dose of 300 micrograms. She had used them hundreds of times for patients with severe allergic reactions in the emergency department. She knew exactly what they did at a standard dose. Adrenaline making the heart race, opening the bronchi, raising blood pressure. And she knew what they did when injected directly into the neck vein at a full dose in a healthy man. Ventricular fibrillation, a heart rate beyond control, acute heart failure. Wade lunged. Lennox didn't step back anymore. She twisted, her right hand snatching the injector from the backpack, pulled the safety cap off with her teeth. And when Wade reached with his left hand to grab her collar, she drove the injector into the side of his neck, just beneath the angle of his jaw, where the external jugular vein stood out beneath the skin, and pressed. 300 micrograms of epinephrine emptied straight into the blood vessel running toward his brain. Wade let go. His eyes flew wide, his mouth opened, one hand reaching up to his neck where the injector still stuck. He stumbled back 1 step, 2 steps, then his knees buckled. The knife fell onto the marble floor with a sharp metallic clatter. He toppled sideways, his whole body convulsing, his eyes rolling wildly, white foam gathering at the corner of his mouth. Ventricular fibrillation. His heart was beating more than 200 times a minute, and not pumping a single drop of blood. Lennox stood against the steel cabinet, gasping, watching Wade seize on the floor. She didn't go near him. She didn't help him. For the first time in her life, Nurse Lennox Avery stood watching a man lying on the floor and didn't kneel down to save him. 15 seconds later, 2 guards broke through the door. 30 seconds later, Carrick ran down from the 2nd floor. He saw Wade lying motionless on the floor, the injector lodged in his neck, and Lennox standing against the medicine cabinet, her face deathly white, her hands shaking, but standing, still standing. 3 months after the night, Wade Sutter lay convulsing on the floor of the medical room. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon in January, Orla Kinney knocked on the door of Lennox's room on the 3rd floor of the Brookline mansion and placed a thick white envelope on the table, the outside stamped with the seal of the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. Orla didn't say anything. She only set the envelope down, nodded once, then walked out and closed the door behind her. Lennox sat on the edge of the bed and looked at that envelope for 10 minutes before opening it. Inside were 2 documents. The first document was an order expunging her federal conviction, signed by a judge, officially sealed, clearly stating the name Lennox Marie Avery, 27 years old, residing in Massachusetts, with the charge of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances completely vacated under appeal and new evidence confirming innocence. The second document was a confirmation from the Massachusetts Board of Nursing, notifying her that her registered nurse license had been fully restored, effective immediately. Lennox read her name on the license, Lennox Marie Avery, RN. 2 letters after her name, RN, the letters she had lost 3 years, 1 month, and 17 days before. The letters the system had taken away at the same time it took her home, her bank accounts, and everything that made her herself. Now they were back, on white paper, in black ink, with a red seal. Official, real. She set the 2 pages down on the bed, looked out the window where the January afternoon light was shining through the bare maple trees, and she cried. Not the way Nadia had cried that night in the Berkshire's woods because Hagen had betrayed her. Not crying from fear, from pain, or from despair. Crying because she felt light. So light she felt as if she might float off the edge of the bed. Light as if someone had just cut the plastic zip tie that had been cinched around her chest for the past 3 years. So long that she had grown used to it and forgotten it was there. She cried for 10 minutes. No one knocked. No one asked. The Valenti mansion, where every sound was heard, chose not to hear this time. That night, Lennox stood on the 2nd floor balcony, looking out over the Boston suburbs. Streetlights flickered along the gravel road. Warm yellow light glowed from the houses on both sides. The sky was clear and cold, and her breath rose in white smoke. She heard the footsteps before she saw the person. Carrick stood beside her, a hand's width away, one hand resting on the stone railing, his eyes looking in the same direction she was looking, though Lennox knew he wasn't looking at the streetlights. He was silent for a long while. Then he said, "You can leave now. The license is back. The conviction is gone. No one is keeping you here." Lennox turned to look at him. "Are you sending me away?" It wasn't an angry question. It was the question of someone who wanted to understand. Carrick didn't look at her. He looked at the streetlights, at the darkness between the streaks of light, and spoke in the voice Lennox had heard him use only once before, the night he held Nadia on the cliff. "I'm giving you a choice I never had. No one gave me the choice to leave this world. I was 19 when my father died, and from that second on, I had no right to choose anything except moving forward. You have that right. You should use it." Lennox looked at him, looked at the outline of his face and the faint light spilling from the sitting room through the glass door, looked at his jaw clenched tight, as if every word he had just spoken had cost him something, looked at the way his hand gripped the stone railing until his knuckles turned white. He was pushing her away, and he was hurting because he was doing it. "If I stay," Lennox said slowly, choosing each word the way he had chosen every word in the medical room that night, "I stay because I choose to, not because I owe you." Carrick turned to look at her. For the first time on that balcony that night, he truly looked at her, and he lifted his hand, slowly, hesitantly, his fingers touching the loose strand of hair that the wind had blown across her forehead, gently brushing it aside, so lightly it was almost no touch at all, so lightly that if Lennox hadn't seen his hand, she would have thought it was the wind. They were both trembling, not because of the cold. He said nothing more. She said nothing more. But he didn't pull his hand back right away, and she didn't step away. 2 days later, Nadia sat across from Carrick in his office and told her brother what she had been preparing to say for weeks. "I'm going to cooperate with the FBI. Publicly. I'm going to meet Special Agent Cross and tell him everything I know." Carrick looked at his sister. Not angry. Not surprised. Perhaps he had known already. "I want out of this world, Carrick. I want to graduate from law school. I want to live without guards following me. I want to call my friends without being afraid someone is listening. And I want you to get out with me." Carrick didn't answer. He looked at the photograph of their father on the wall, the photograph he had stared at that night in the wine cellar when his hands trembled after learning the truth about Hagen, and he was silent for a very long time. Then he said, softly, almost only loud enough for Nadia to hear, "I won't stop you." He didn't say he would get out with her, but he didn't stop her. And in Carrick Valenti's world, not stopping someone was the greatest concession he could give. 6 months after the Berkshires night, 6 months after the snake cave, the cliff, the 5 escalades, the cashmere coat, the medical room, the naloxone syringe, the epinephrine injector, and the finger touching that strand of hair on the balcony, Lennox Avery stood in the staff locker room at Mass General Hospital, Boston, wearing navy blue nursing scrubs, a stethoscope around her neck, a name badge pinned to her chest. Lennox Avery, RN, Emergency Department, first shift. Her hands shook as she placed her old emergency backpack inside the locker. The backpack had stayed with her for 3 years on the road, into the snake cave, through the storm-soaked woods, through 2 times saving Nadia's life, through 1 act of defending herself with an injector. Now it lay inside a hospital locker, beside a coat and a purse, and Lennox didn't need it anymore, because this whole hospital was one enormous emergency backpack, and she belonged here. She stepped into the emergency department hallway. White lights, the smell of antiseptic, the beeping of monitors, the sound of carts, nurses calling to one another. Everything was so familiar that she almost cried again. But she didn't cry because she was in the place where crying wasn't what she needed to do. 12 hours later, the shift ended. Lennox walked out through the hospital's main entrance in the late April afternoon light, tired, feet aching, back sore, and happy in a way she had forgotten. Happiness could be so simple, just being allowed to do the thing she was good at, being called by her own name, being seen. On the walkway in front of the hospital, a black Cadillac Escalade waited silently by the curb. Engine off, windows dark, just like 6 months before. On the dirt road outside her broken Toyota Corolla, but different. The rear door opened. Carrick sat inside, not wearing a suit, only a pale gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up. his tie loosened, his eyes tired after a day in his world. He watched her step out of the hospital doors in her nursing uniform, hair pinned neatly up, name badge on her chest, and he smiled. Not the smile his 23 men knew, not the polite smile from a meeting room, not the cold smile on the cliff that night. Just a smile. The smile of a 37-year-old man, tired, lonely, dangerous, sitting in a car waiting for a woman to walk out through hospital doors. And for the first time in 18 years, he was waiting for something that had nothing to do with empire, power, or money. Lennox smiled back. Then she walked toward the car. Lennox Avery, after 3 years, 1 month, and 17 days of living like a ghost, had finally been seen. The story of Lennox and Carrick isn't only a story about the Mafia or a rescue. This is a story about what happens when the world turns its back on a person, but that person refuses to turn her back on the world. Lennox lost everything, but she didn't lose the hands that knew how to heal. Carrick had everything, but he had no one brave enough to tell him the truth. The lesson this story wants to send to everyone is very simple. A person's worth doesn't lie in status, in wealth, or in the name written on official papers. It lies in what you choose to do when no one is watching, when no one is paying you, when you could walk away and no one would blame you. Lennox walked into the snake cave not because she was strong. She walked in because she couldn't not walk in. And sometimes, the most ordinary thing, one person refusing to leave when someone else needs them, is the most extraordinary thing a human being can do. If this story touched something inside you, please press the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are real, that no matter how deep life has pushed you down, your hands can still reach for someone and pull both of you back up. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss similar stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your real life? Someone who helped you when you had nothing left? Or a time when you chose to stay when you could have walked away? Please share your true feelings from the heart in the comment section below. We read every comment, and every story you share becomes a source of inspiration for us to keep bringing you content that reaches the deepest emotions. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.